AlisonWinePromo.com, as you have been watching this show for a while, you know they've been with me for a while through a lot of dicey interviews and a lot of dicey topics, and they never shy away because they're just an extremist wine company and they're not afraid of extremism because all the wines are for the extremist that does not want to go to federal prison. Here's why they're extremists. A lot of them come from between 6,000 and 9,000 feet. So some of the highest vineyards in the entire world. They come from small family operations, and we're opening it beyond Argentina now. We're going to open the wine club to vineyards in France, Spain, Italy. And instead of just ordering a bottle or two here and there, you join the club, and every 3 months, you get 6 bottles of wine. And that way, whenever you're going to the party that's really awkward, you're trying to apologize for unfriending somebody over Trump or the vaccines or whatever else it was that you unfriended them for, you can bring a great bottle of wine, which also comes with a great message that it's extremist wine, uncensored wine, wine that supports Alison, and it's a conversation starter on top of just always being a great taste. And you will never be empty-handed, again, going to one of those awkward cocktail parties. All right, I'm going to bring in Dr. James Miller. He was on, I don't know, probably, a year or so ago, and also fled the Seattle area. And maybe we get in your backstory in a little bit, but let's just get right to what we're talking about today. The study that we're looking at here is titled Long-Term Follow-Up of Transsexual Persons Undergoing Sex Reassignment Surgery Cohort Study in Sweden. And the really, frankly, big picture takeaway from all of this is that it says they were had higher overall mortality, death from suicide, increased risk for suicide attempts, psychiatric inpatient care. And I thought it was interesting, not just because of what they found specifically, like what the findings were, which are interesting, but because if you look at the mainstream media reporting on this issue, you often hear very little negative about it. For instance, we talked about this, I think the last time you were on, teens who received gender-affirming care had 60% lower odds of depression, UW study finds. The study found that gender-affirming care provided to teens at the Seattle Children's Gender Clinic likely reduced rates of depression and suicidal thoughts. It's a very positive article, which almost just regurgitates what probably was a press release from Seattle Children's Hospital. I think it was very common for those of us in the media to just take what these hospital groups said verbatim and not really be too critical about it. We just assumed they were the experts and they knew better than us and didn't know that some of these topics were very controversial and we should have done more of our homework. On top of that, a lot of people may not realize that actually hospitals like Seattle Children's has paid programming on some of these local news stations, and they will pay for, we'll call it Healthline or HealthLink. It's your, weekly health report. And they actually are paid promos that maybe you realize are paid, maybe you don't. They come across as news reports. It's sometimes hard to tell. So since I cover censored topics, I found this to be very interesting. I'm glad you passed it to me, Dr. Miller. Where do you want to start with the study itself?
Well, I think maybe the date that it's from 2011.
Oh, so it's very old.
Right.
Okay.
But and I think that's an important perspective. People have been regurgitating this. They've been regurgitating in England lately when they shut down the children's transgender clinic. And the point is that we knew this. We knew before the kind of craze over the last little bit that we've seen in America and a lot of the Western world about transgender surgery being the solution for so many people's problems. We already knew that it multiplied. If you look at that Swedish study, it's a good quality study with patients who are captured, like they can't go to another network. So their data is good. We already know that it more than logarithmically increased your rate of suicide attempts to do transgender surgery amongst kids. But, you and I are both from Washington State. This is illegal to even have this discussion in Washington State based on their hate laws. I'm not sure if you've read some of the recent laws that came through and the reporting things. And it's been very bizarre for me as a clinician to look at how this all unfolded and be like, but we knew this before it ever happened. We already knew it was a high-risk procedure that had a high risk of negative outcomes. But if I said that in my home state back when I would live there, that's now hate speech, punishable, I think, somewhere between 2 and 5 years in prison. And, you know, can I go home anymore? Because I quoted this Swedish study and said, hey, maybe there's a problem. And I'm not sure if you've read any of the hate speech legislation that was signed into law in Washington State this year, but just regurgitating the study, just putting it online, that makes you hate speech. And I think that is probably a good place to start.
Yeah. Brandy Cruz was on talking about the hotline that they were planning, I guess, to institute, or they are. It's going to be another year in the making, but you can narc on your neighbor, I guess, if you feel like they said something hateful, and you can call it what it does. I'm not really quite sure. It seems like just a very weird political move that has not really a whole lot of bite to it, but it just sets a precedent, like you said, in the direction of turning speech into a crime in Washington state. Another thing that's interesting about this topic too is that Washington elevated gender affirming care to a level of child abuse that if a parent does not respect a kid's wishes, that the kid runs away, the shelter no longer has to tell the kid, or sorry, the parents, where the kid is. The state anyway can take the kid essentially, and from what I understand, at least from interviewing people, they can even receive their medical care without the parental consent. So basically saying that it's not just a conversation that a parent and a child have together, a decision that a family makes, and a parent has the right to say, I don't think this is good for you, or I do think this is good for you, or whatever, that it's now something that must go in the direction the state says it must, or else you are essentially guilty of child abuse. Maybe they're not going to yet come take you and take your child for CPS yet. Right now it's written so that the kid has to run away and then the state doesn't have to tell you about it. But I mean, it's not hard to predict a day when they do show up at your door and say you're not parenting the way that we like you to. So I mean, I think it's a valid thing for parents in Washington state to be very concerned about.
Absolutely. And this transgender madness that swept through Washington when I was there. I remember I was working in the ICU and we had a kid who attempted suicide after, a not great partial outcome from transgender surgery. And allegedly some other surgeon misgendered the kid by accident while trying to be polite. Our entire team of a dozen surgeons got reported to the diversity, equity, inclusion officer by a dietitian who was listening from the hallway. And we were supposed to be forced to do re-education training. I mean, you're talking about people that have spent decades in training and were sentenced to these things that were just inane. We all knew what was right and wrong, and someone just had a slip of the tongue. The kid themselves didn't know their own gender and got it wrong, called themselves by their different names. And we're all trying to be respectful and polite. But there's just this march with only one end that the ideologues on this have, that it's only okay if you're somehow surgically altering a kid and somehow supporting something that is considered historically an abomination to do. And if you have any thought, quoting the Swedish study that's good medicine, you're a blasphemer and you need a re-education camp.
Text Alison to 989-898 and you get a free info kit on gold with no obligation. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on national debt has surpassed every individual budget item except Social Security. So basically that means the US now spends more on interest than on national defense or even Medicare. And it's just getting worse because we continue to spend. So if you're somebody who is I'm not going to bank entirely on my 401k or my IRA, and you want to invest in gold, again, great chance. Do it. Birch Gold's been in business over 20 years. They've had thousands and thousands of customers and get lots of 5-star reviews. And it's an easy way to get more information while also supporting the channel. So text Alison, ALISON, to 989-898 today. And I'm going to ask Dr. Miller, too, about my garden and why I can't seem to grow any food, because that's probably another great thing to invest in. I'm much better at chickens than vegetables. I keep having these worms. And I know you're kind of a master gardener. So we'll talk about that in a second. But let's go back to this study again when we're looking at it. And it says that the overall mortality for sex reassigned persons was higher during follow-up than for controls of the same birth sex. So I think it would be interesting if they had compared it to people who believed they had the wrong sex, they were born the wrong gender, but didn't get the surgery. From what I understand, I don't know if that caveat was in there, like that they compared it to, you know, two people, both of whom think they're the wrong sex, only one of whom gets the surgery, who has a higher mortality rate. Maybe you could break that down for us. But the conclusion is that persons with transsexualism after sex reassignment have considerably higher risks for mortality, suicidal behavior, and psychiatric morbidity than the general population. Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as a treatment for transsexualism and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group. Yeah, I mean, is it because there was already a predisposition, or is it because of the surgery?
Well, I can say, looking at it from someone who's never done a transgender surgery but have seen the outcomes, it looks horrible. Doesn't look right. That's, like, I think, a Captain Obvious statement. But I also think another Captain Obvious statement that's behind all this is it's not a fix-all. That most of these people come in for it and they're badly damaged for whatever reason, psychologically. And this set of surgeries does not cure it, but it's rolled out like it is. And I think that more than answering the question definitively, it's saying, hey, we need to have this discussion. We need to allow people to say, you know, basically when you start looking at the pelvis surgeries, there's basically 100% complication rate. And, you know, they all need revision surgeries. So this isn't like great. They don't look or feel good. That's just a simple fact. But it also doesn't fix the psychological problems. And I think that that's just being able to have that conversation is the issue, whereas back in Washington State, that conversation wasn't possible. And I think that for people moving forward, we should have, you know, abruptly stopping a major entire country program like the Tavistock clinic in England. It just shows, like, oh my gosh, we've been investing millions and millions of dollars, changing society, changing education curriculums for medical school, changing, you know, education for junior high, high school, college age kids. And then, like, oops. So we're just abruptly stopping it. It goes to show that we weren't paying attention to what we already knew. We weren't listening to our patients say, I'm not better. This didn't work out. And I think that's my big frustration looking at it from an academic perspective, is like, this was always not great. And, you know, again, that gets you possibly arrested in Seattle right now.
Yeah. Everybody go to alisonmorrow.locals.com if you haven't yet. Join the editorial board, and you can put questions in ahead of time for people like Dr. Miller. It's a great way to support my work and also get great value. You get to go one-on-one with the most censored people on the internet and on the most censored topics. You don't like my questions, I'll shut up and read your questions. Okay. alisonmorrow.locals.com. And you can send me some actual mail if you want to send me some loose pocket change. You want to send me a winning lottery ticket, nothing edible, nothing creepy, to P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. Love getting the cards, just notes of encouragement. I always look forward to them.